The rain came down in heavy sheets, hammering the roof of the cabin, as if the sky itself wanted to crush the little house. The man sat near the fireplace, his only light the flicker of orange flames that danced across the log walls. The storm had been raging for hours, turning the forest outside into a black sea of shadows. He thought he was used to being alone. He had chosen this place far away from cities, far away from people, but tonight the silence felt different. Tonight, the storm carried something else with it, something he could not explain. At first he thought it was only the wind. The howl carried through the trees, long and sharp, like voices calling in the night. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the crackle of firewood, but the sound dug under his skin. He shifted in his chair, tightening the blanket over his shoulders. Then came the knock. A sharp, hurried thud against the cabin's front door. He froze. The cabin was miles from the nearest road, hidden deep inside the forest. No one ever came here, not by accident, not by chance. The knock came again, harder this time, desperate and fast. His chest tightened as he stood, moving slowly to the door. He wanted to believe it was just a lost hiker, someone caught in the storm, but something in his gut warned him otherwise. He pressed his hand against the wooden door, feeling the vibration of another strike. He hesitated, but then he pulled it open. A woman collapsed into his arms. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her skin, her face pale and her breath shallow. She looked as if she had been running for hours, her hair tangled and dripping with rain, her eyes wide and wild, flicked around the cabin as if searching for threats even inside. He carried her to the chair near the fire, placing a blanket over her trembling body. She tried to speak, but the words broke apart in her throat, caught between fear and exhaustion. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. But she only shook her head, clutching the blanket as though it were her last line of defense. For a long moment, the only sounds were the storm outside and her ragged breathing. Then she leaned forward, her voice just a whisper, cracked and broken. "They followed me." The man frowned, her eyes flicked to the window, where the rain streaked down like silver knives. "You'll hear them too. Soon." Cold weight pressed into his chest. He wanted to believe she was just frightened, that she was speaking nonsense, but then he heard it, something beyond the storm. Between the crash of thunder, a faint noise, like footsteps moving across wet earth, slow, measured, circling. He went to the window, pressing his face against the cold glass. He could barely see through the rain, but the trees seemed to shift, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. He grabbed the rifle that hung on the wall, the weapon heavy in his hands. "If you're in trouble, we can call someone when the storm clears," he said, though even he knew there was no signal this deep in the wilderness. She looked at him sharply, her wet hair clinging to her face, her eyes glowing with something more than fear. "You don't understand," she whispered. "There's no one to call. No one who can stop them. Once they've marked a place, nothing stays untouched." The man's hand tightened on the rifle. "Then why come here? Why bring them to my cabin?" Her lips trembled. For the first time he saw guilt behind her fear. "Because you've built this place," she said softly. "And because you're the only one they can't erase." He stared at her, his pulse thundering in his ears. "What are you talking about? I don't even know you." Her eyes locked onto his, filled with sorrow he couldn't understand. "No," she whispered, "because they already took that from you. They took everything you were. But they couldn't take this cabin. They couldn't take us." Before he could respond, a heavy thud shook the cabin walls, like something massive. Pressing against the logs, the fire flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally across the room. The woman clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "You're not safe anymore. Because of me." Another thud shook the cabin. This time it was followed by a sound that froze his blood, a low scraping hiss like claws dragging across wood, moving along the walls outside. The storm seemed to grow quieter, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The man felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, but suddenly he knew the weapon would not be enough. Whatever had followed her here, whatever had found his cabin, was not something made of flesh and blood. The woman buried her face in her hands. Shaking, I tried to outrun them. I thought I could lead them away, but I was wrong. They'll never stop now. She lifted her head again, her eyes meeting his. And once they see you, they won't let you go either. The cabin groaned under another strike. The fire sputtered low, and for a moment the room was swallowed in shadows. The man's heart raced, his thoughts spinning in panic and disbelief. He didn't know this woman. He didn't understand her words. But he could feel the truth of her fear, and he could hear the things outside circling, waiting. For the first time in years, the cabin he had trusted as his safe haven no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. And with every passing second, the walls seemed thinner, the storm quieter, and the night more alive with the presence of something unseen. Morning came, but the storm had not fully left. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, dripping from the cabin roof in endless rhythm. The man woke to the sound of crackling wood, and for a brief second, he thought the night had only been a dream. But then he saw Hertha woman from the storm sitting in his chair by the fire, wrapped in his blanket, as if she had always belonged there. Her wet clothes hung by the hearth, drying in the low heat. She looked calmer now, but her eyes still carried that strange, watchful weight. He rubbed his face, trying to shake the unease. The storm's clearing. You'll be able to head out today. His tone was firm, the kind he used to end conversations. He expected her to nod, maybe thank him, then prepare to leave. Instead, she turned to him slowly, as though his words carried no meaning. "I'm not leaving," she said. He blinked. "What do you mean you're not leaving? This is my cabin. You can't just stay here." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something closer to sadness. "You still don't see it, do you? This place was never yours alone. It was always ours." He felt irritation flare up inside him, pushing against the unease that had haunted him all night. "I don't even know who you are," he snapped. "You show up in the middle of a storm, talking about things hunting you, and now you're acting like this is your home. You're confused, or..." She stood suddenly, moving with a kind of calm certainty that unsettled him more than her fear. Had she walked past him, brushing her fingers along the wooden walls of the cabin, as if touching something sacred? "I remember every board," she whispered. "Remember the smell of the wood when we cut it. I remember your hands building this place with mine." She stopped and turned, her eyes locking on his. "You don't remember? But your hands do." His chest tightened. "Stop it." But then she bent down and pressed her palm against a spot on the floorboards near the hearth. "Look here," she said softly. Reluctantly, he walked closer. Beneath her hand, the wood looked worn, darker than the rest. She pushed, and to his surprise, the board shifted slightly, revealing a faint mark carved deep into the grain. It wasn't a random scratch. It was a symbol, circular with lines crossing through it. His stomach twisted because something inside him recognized it. He didn't know how, but the sight of that mark pulled at something buried deep inside his mind. Flash of himself kneeling with a knife, carving that shape while someone stood beside him. He stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, I never did this." "I never." "You did," she said firmly, standing again. "And they've been trying to make you forget ever since. But this cabin remembers. That's why I came back. That's why I can't leave." His breath grew. Uneven. The memory fragment was faint, like a dream fading too fast. But the mark was real. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination, some trick of the storm and her words, but his gut told him otherwise. As the day dragged on, she moved around the cabin with ease, as though she belonged to every corner of it. She opened cupboards. Without asking, walked into the storage room like she had always known where it was. Even hummed softly as she cooked what little food she found. He sat near the door, rifle across his knees, his eyes never leaving her. The longer she stayed, the less it felt like she was a guest. The cabin seemed to bend around her presence, responding to her in ways he couldn't explain. The fire burned. Brighter when she touched it, the shadows pulled away from her as though in respect. By nightfall, his frustration boiled over. "You said you were hunted," he said sharply. "You said you brought danger here. So why are you still here?" I put both of us at risk. She looked at him, her face illuminated by the firelight. Because if I leave, they'll take you. They'll finish what they started, and I can't let that happen. His jaw clenched. This isn't your decision. This is my life, my cabin. You don't get to, but his words froze in his throat as movement caught his eye. Through the window, beyond the dripping rain, the forest shifted. The trees seemed to bend, the shadows lengthening unnaturally. He leaned closer, heart pounding, and then he saw her, not the woman by the fire, but her reflection in the glass. Except the reflection wasn't sitting, it was standing outside in the storm, staring back at him. He spun, eyes wide, but the woman remained where she was, quiet and calm in the chair. He looked back at the window. The reflection was gone. Only darkness remained. His hands shook as he gripped the rifle. What the hell is happening here? The woman's eyes glimmered with sorrow. She rose, walked slowly to the window, and placed her hand against the glass. "We're close now," she whispered. "They found the doorway again. And once they're through, nothing will ever belong to you, not even your own name." The cabin walls groaned softly as though something pressed against them from the outside. The man felt the last of his certainty slipping away. This woman, this stranger who claimed his home was hers, was either insane or she was the only thing standing between him and something far worse. The man could not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the reflection in the window, that other version of her. Standing in the storm, staring at him with eyes too dark, too hollow. The sound of the rain had softened to a dull patter, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was as if the forest itself was holding back, waiting for something to happen. He sat in his chair with the rifle across his lap, his gaze locked on the fire, but his thoughts circled endlessly. The woman hadn't moved from the cabin. She sat across from him, calm, almost patient, as if she knew he wouldn't dare throw her out. Her presence was unsettling, yet there was something steady about her too, something that made it impossible for him to turn her away. Still, anger burned in him. He wanted answers. He needed them. Finally, he broke the silence. "What are they?" he asked, his voice rough. "The things outside, the ones you say, are after you, after me." Her eyes lifted to his, and for a moment he saw the storm reflected in them. "They're not alive," she said quietly. "Not the way you understand life. They're shadows that learn to move. They feed on memory, on the pieces of us that make us who we are. When they take enough, there's nothing left but an empty shell. You've seen their work before, even if you didn't recognize it." He frowned. "I don't remember anything like that." Her lips tightened. "Of course you don't. They've already taken pieces of you. They took the part that remembers me." The words landed like a stone in his chest. He wanted to argue, to call her a liar, but his thoughts faltered. He thought about the strange mark carved into the floor, about the flicker of memory that had hit him when he saw it, about how the cabin sometimes felt familiar in ways he couldn't explain, as if it knew things he didn't. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Prove it." She stood without hesitation. Moving to the far wall, she knelt and pressed her hand against the wood. Her palm slid along the surface until it found a small groove, almost invisible to the eye. She pushed, and with a faint click, a section of the wall shifted. The man's breath caught as the panel swung open, revealing a narrow compartment hidden inside the wall. Within it lay a bundle of old papers, yellowed with time, and a small metal box etched with the same strange symbol carved into the floor. She pulled them out carefully, as though they were fragile pieces of herself. Handing the box to him, she whispered, "You locked this away yourself, because you knew one day you'd forget." His fingers trembled as he opened the box. Inside were photographs faded, torn at the edges, but still clear enough to see. His breath caught in his throat. One of them showed him standing outside the cabin, younger, his hair longer, his face unshaven, and beside him was her. The same woman, smiling, her hand resting on his arm, as if it belonged there. His chest tightened painfully. He flipped through the rest images of the cabin half built, of the two of them carrying wood, sitting together by a fire, even carving symbols into the beams. And yet, no matter how hard he stared, he couldn't pull the memories back. Faces felt both familiar and alien, like a dream he couldn't wake from. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, his voice breaking. "If this is real, if this is us, why don't I remember?" She touched his hand gently, her eyes filled with a grief that felt ancient, because they took it, piece by piece, until you didn't even know I existed. They thought, erasing. "Me would break you, but you're still here." This cabin held what they couldn't erase. That's why I came back. Because this place remembers us, even when you can't. Before he could respond, a sudden creak echoed from the far side of the cabin. His head snapped toward the sound, rifle raising instinctively. The shadows in the corner seemed to deepen, stretching across the floor like spilled ink. The fire flickered, fighting against the dark, but the shapes only grew thicker. The woman grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. They found a way in. The man's breath came fast. "I thought you said the cabin was safe." "It was," she whispered, her eyes wide. "But now they know you're awake to it. They'll come harder. They won't stop." The shadows twisted along the wall, forming shapes that looked almost human, but stretched too tall, too thin. Their fingers curled like claws scraping against the wood with a sound that set his teeth on edge. One of them pressed forward, its face nothing but a hollow void, and for a heartbeat. He swore he saw his own reflection inside it. The woman pulled him back toward the center of the room, her grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me," she said fiercely. "They can only take what you let go of. Hold on to what's yours, your name, your will, this cabin. Fight them, or they'll drain everything you are." His pulse hammered in his ears as the shadows pressed. Closer, the firelight bending and twisting as though afraid. He gritted his teeth, raising the rifle though he knew bullets wouldn't matter. His voice cracked with both fear and defiance. "This is my cabin." The shadows froze at the words, shuddering as if recoiling. The woman's eyes lit with sudden fire. "Yes," she whispered. "Say it again." He steadied his breath, staring at the figures that threatened to swallow him whole. His voice grew louder, stronger, carrying through the creaking cabin walls. "This is my cabin." The shadows trembled, their forms flickering like smoke caught in a storm. For the first time, the man saw them hesitate. But he also knew this was only the beginning. The storm outside had died into silence, but the cabin groaned as though it bore the weight of something far heavier than wind or rain. The man stood in the middle of the room, rifle trembling in his hands, sweat beading along his brow. The shadows still clung to the walls, flickering in and out of form, and though they had recoiled at his words, he felt their hunger pressing against him like a cold hand on his chest. The woman stayed close, her eyes burning with determination. "You see it now?" she whispered. "They don't just want the cabin, they want you. They want the memory of you, so there's nothing left to resist them." He swallowed hard, forcing himself not to look away from the writhing dark. "Me? Why not you?" Her gaze shifted toward the floorboards where the carved symbol glowed faintly in the firelight. "Because you're the anchor. This place, these walls, they're tied to you. I can only protect it through you. If they erase you completely, the cabin falls. Once the cabin falls, they spill into the world without a barrier to hold them. Back." The words dug into him like splinters. He had never asked for this. He had come to the cabin for solitude, for quiet, not to stand guard against nightmares that moved like smoke. But even as fear clawed at him, something deeper pushed back. The strange recognition of the mark, the photographs that proved a life. He could no longer recall of it, whispered that he was part of something far larger than himself. The fire sputtered, snapping him out of thought. The shadows thickened again, curling toward the windows and the door. One pressed its face against the glass, and he swore he saw his own eyes staring back at him from the void. His breath hitched. "They're testing the door," the woman murmured. Stepping forward, she placed her hand against the wooden frame, whispering words he couldn't understand. The cabin shuddered, as if answering her voice. "They'll try to force it soon. When they do, you must not let them draw you in." Man tightened his grip on the rifle, even though a voice in the back of his head told him it was useless. "And if they get inside, then we fight them," she said. Her voice didn't waver, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. "But remember, it isn't the bullets that matter. What you believe, they're shadows of you, fragments of what you've lost. They'll use your face, your voice. They'll try to convince you you're already theirs." As if in answer, a sharp knock thundered against the cabin door. The sound was so sudden, so heavy, that the man nearly fired in shock. He staggered back, eyes wide, as another knock shook the wood louder, more insistent. Rattling the hinges, the woman's face went pale. It's too soon. They shouldn't be able to touch the door yet. But the knocks continued, growing rhythmic, almost human. And then came the voice, deep, familiar, sending chills through the man's spine. "Let me in." He froze. His throat closed, because the voice on the other side of the door was his own. The woman grabbed his arm, nails digging into his skin. "Don't listen." But the voice spoke again, calm and steady. "It's me. You locked yourself inside. You've been trapped with her too long. She isn't who she says she is. Open the door. Let me show you the truth." The man's breath came fast, his chest tightening. The voice was perfect, his tone, his cadence, even the faint roughness. In his words, he felt the pull of it, as though the door itself wanted to swing open. "She's using you." The voice continued, softer now, almost pleading. "She's taking your memories. She's feeding you lies. Mute the real you. She's the shadow. Open the door before she takes everything." His rifle shook in his grip. His mind spun, caught between the woman's warning and the voice that sounded so painfully real. He looked at her, his jaw tight. "How do I know you're not lying?" Her eyes glistened with a raw sadness. "Because if I wanted you gone, I wouldn't beg you to hold on. I wouldn't fight to keep you here." Another slam against the door rattled the cabin, making the walls creak. The voice roared now, angry, desperate. "Let me in." The fire flared suddenly, as if responding to the chaos, and for a heartbeat, the man saw two versions of himself, one standing inside the cabin, with the rifle, and one outside, pounding on the door, eyes hollow with hunger. His heart pounded, his breath ragged. He shouted into the storm of noise, his voice breaking but firm. "This is my cabin." The shadows recoiled again, the knocks ceasing as though cut off by the words. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with dread. The woman let out a trembling breath. "You held them back. For now." But the man's hands would not stop shaking. His own voice still echoed in his skull, whispering doubts he couldn't silence. Would have fought them this time, but how long before the shadows? At the door found a way in. The night did not ease after the pounding at the door. If anything, the silence that followed was heavier, almost alive. The man sat rigid, his rifle across his knees, but it felt like a useless stick in his trembling hands. By the fire, her eyes fixed on the shadows crawling along the ceiling beams, the flames burned low, and with every flicker, shapes above seemed to swell and stretch, spring in voices too faint to make out. Then he heard a murmur in the stillness. At first he thought it was the woman, but when he looked, her lips weren't moving. The sound wasn't coming from her at all. It was coming from the walls. He leaned closer without meaning to, straining his ears. The whispers grew clearer, weaving around him like threads of smoke. They weren't in some alien tongue. They were speaking English. His own voice multiplied, fractured, layered into dozens of echoes. "You don't belong here. You were alone before her. She's not telling you everything." His breath caught in his throat. The whispers slid inside his head like hooks, tugging at doubts he couldn't shake. Every word felt like it had been plucked from his private thoughts. He clutched his skull with one hand, squeezing his eyes shut, but the voices only grew louder. The woman stood abruptly, crossing the room with urgent steps. She gripped his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Don't let them inside. They can't hurt you unless you let them anchor. You hear me?" But the whispers rose to a chorus, overlapping, battering him with truths and half-truths. "She left you once. She's the reason you forgot. She's using you." The man's vision blurred. He saw flashes, her face lit by firelight, her hand slipping from his, the sound of her voice fading into darkness. Were they memories, dreams, or were they planted by the shadows? He staggered back from her touch, his chest heaving.
Tell
Me the truth, he demanded, his voice raw. Did you take my memories? Her eyes filled with hurt, but she didn't look away. No, I tried to hold them for you. I tried to keep what they couldn't reach, but they always come back, stronger. That's why the cabin matters. It's a fortress of what you once were. Without it, you'd be nothing but a reflection in their hollow faces. But the voices hissed over her words, louder, crueler. She lies. She kept you here. She made you forget. The man pressed his hands against his ears, but it didn't stop them. They were not outside voices. They were inside him, slipping. Between his thoughts, he shouted into the cabin, desperate. Enough. The shadows froze, their writhing forms stilled by his command. For a moment, the silence returned. His own voice echoed against the walls, small but sharp in the aftermath. He lowered his hands slowly, his chest still heaving. The woman watched him carefully, as if weighing whether he would break or endure. You see, she whispered, you have power here. They bend to your voice. That's why they want you erased, because you're the only one who can push them back. The fire sputtered, sending sparks into the air, and the shadows moved again, but this time not at the walls. They pooled at the floor, black liquid shapes sliding closer across the boards. The man stepped back, his rifle useless against the shifting dark. Then one of the shadows lifted from the floor, reshaping into a figure. It stood taller than him, but its face was his. Not hollow this time, but full, alive, almost human. It smiled. You don't need her, it said, its voice steady, perfect. You've always been stronger alone. Let her go, and we'll give back what you've lost. The woman moved between them, her arms spread as if shielding him. Don't. Listen, that's not you. It's only what they want you to believe. But the figure tilted its head, its eyes locked on his. Do you really trust her? She's been here all along. Ask yourself why you only remember when she decides to show. You something? Ask why she hid the box until now? As the man's throat tightened. The accusation cut deep, because part of him had wondered the same thing. His doubt slipped like a crack through his defenses, and the shadow smiled wider, stepping closer. The air grew colder, the fire dimming with every step. The woman's voice, sharpened with fear. Don't give them that opening. But his grip on the rifle loosened. His mind wavered. The shadow extended a hand, palm open, offering, take back your life. End this lie. For a heartbeat, he nearly reached out. The pull was overwhelming, like gravity itself had shifted. But then he saw the photographs again and his mind faded. Images of him and her building the cabin together. He couldn't remember the moments, but he remembered the feeling, the quiet certainty that there had been trust once. His hand clenched back around the rifle. His voice broke, but it carried. Strength? No, you're not me. The shadow flinched as though struck. Its face rippled, the features collapsing back into emptiness. The other shadows hissed and writhed, recoiling toward the corners. The fire roared back to life, blazing higher than before. The woman sagged with relief, her shoulders trembling. But the man knew the fight wasn't over. The shadows had spoken. Now, and once they had found a voice, they would not fall silent again. He looked at the door, then back at her. They're not going to stop, are they? Her answer was almost a whisper. Not until one of us is gone. The night pressed in like a living weight, the storm long gone, but leaving behind a silence that was worse than thunder. The man stood in the center of the cabin, sweat clinging to his skin, the rifle heavy in his grip. The shadows lurked at, the edges restless, waiting, whispering in voices that slipped into his skull like poison. He knew now they would not stop. The woman was right. This fight would only end when one of them was gone. The fire roared bright for the moment, its light holding the darkness at bay, but he could feel the strength of the shadows pressing harder. With every flicker, they were learning, testing, breaking down his walls piece by piece. The woman crouched near the carved symbol on the floor, her hands moving across it, whispering words that made the boards glow faintly. She looked exhausted, as though every syllable tore something from her. "How long can you hold it?" he asked, his voice tight. Her lips trembled into a faint smile. "Long enough if you don't let them take you." The words carried a truth. He didn't want to face this wasn't just about the cabin. It was about him, the anchor she had called him, the reason the shadows wanted his memory erased. If he gave in, even for a moment, the cabin would collapse, and the world beyond would have no defense. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. The shadows surged suddenly, a wave of black pouring across the walls. Faces formed in the darkness. Hundreds of them, each one his own. They spoke at once, their overlapping voices rattling his bones. "You don't belong. She isn't real. You're already ours." The cabin shook under the weight of the chorus. The glass rattled in. The window panes, dust falling from the rafters. The man staggered back, his ears ringing, his vision blurring. The woman shouted something, but her words drowned beneath the storm of voices. Then, and the chaos. One voice rose above the rest, steady, familiar, heartbreakingly human. His own voice, but gentler, tired. "You can rest now. You don't have to fight anymore." His chest tightened. He saw himself standing in the shadows, not twisted or monstrous this time, but weary, eyes full of sorrow. The figure stepped forward, holding out a hand, not with malice, but with understanding. "It's too heavy for you. Let go. We'll carry it. Just let her go." The man's grip faltered. For a moment, he wanted to believe it, wanted to drop the rifle, sink into the dark, let the endless weight of fear and doubt fall away. Then he felt the woman's hand on his arm, grounding him, steadying him. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw something the shadows could never mimic: hope. Fragile, desperate, but real. His jaw tightened. He turned back to the figure and spat the words through clenched teeth. "No, I'm not done." He raised the rifle and fired into the dark. The bullet tore through the figure, not with blood, but with light. The shadow shrieked, recoiling as the fire flared brighter, the walls trembling as though the cabin itself had roared in defiance. The woman cried out words in that strange language, her voice rising to a scream. The carved mark on the floor ignited in a blaze of pale fire, flooding the room with a brilliance that burned away the shadows. The figures clawed at the air, their faces twisting, their voices turning from anger to desperation. "Don't leave. Us. You are us. You cannot survive without us." But the light swallowed them, stripping their voices into nothingness. One by one, the shadows vanished, their forms unraveling into smoke until the cabin stood silent once more. The fire dimmed back to a steady glow. The mark on the floor faded to faint embers. The woman collapsed to her knees, trembling her strength. Spent, the man lowered the rifle, his arms aching, his heart thundering in his chest. It was over. At least for now. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are they gone?" She lifted her head slowly, her eyes glistening with exhaustion and relief. "For tonight, but they'll return. They'll always return. The cabin will stand only as long as you do." Her words carried no comfort, only a heavy truth. He looked around the cabin, his cabin, yet not just his anymore. It was a fortress, a prison, a beacon, all at once. The shadows would come back, again and again, but he was no longer just a man hiding from the storm. He was the anchor, the defender, the one they couldn't erase. He helped her to her feet. The storm outside had passed, the night air eerily calm. For the first time, he understood what the cabin really was, not just a home, but a battleground. And as long as he stood within its walls, the shadows would never take it. He tightened his grip on the rifle, his voice low but firm. "Then let them come." The woman looked at him with a faint, weary smile. "They will." And in the silence that followed, the cabin stood waiting, its walls holding the echoes of a war that would never truly end.